Well, folks, here's what you get when you mismanage your cows. Or I'll call it mismanage. Look at all this hay. I'd call it waste, because they're not going to eat that. A lot of folks would call it fertilizer, and that's fine. If that's what you want to call it, and it all is based on perspective, right? So for example, if I had 500 round bales, and I only needed 100 for the year, I'd call that extra fertilizer. I'd have a few extra, I'd be okay losing one or two. But I have 60 round bales, and realistically all 60 should be put out right now, because just based on the time I started feeding hay and the time of year that it's going to end, you know, the hay supply will end based on an average over the winter, which hopefully we maintain. We might end up going above or below the average, so that could cause real problems. But for me, I'd call this waste. So this is what you get. I usually put the bale rings around, and this is why. And then when I move the cows, I don't give them another bale until they clean this up. And basically look at it, and I've said this before, look at it like you wake up, you're in a rush or something, and you miss breakfast. You don't die, do you? You just are a little hungry at lunch, you know? So it's the same thing, basically. These cows are just going to miss breakfast, and that's why they're going to clean this up. And then once the lunch buffet opens up, they get their big bellies full like nothing ever happened. But that's not the goal of today's video. Today's video, we're going to talk about community a little bit. So I've said in previous videos, I would love to have a mentor, right? I'd love to be able to ask somebody these questions. Maybe get some experience from some of these folk that have, or some wisdom from some of these folk that have the experience, if I could speak some English there. Well, the problem with community, at least for me, is I wasn't born into one. This is Grandpa's farm. Grandpa was a hobby farmer. Grandpa never was much into the farming community. He wouldn't go to plow days. He wouldn't go to, you know, meetings and any type of conglomerations that you guys may have. You know, whether that be a grazing conglomerate or just a farmer's conglomerate. He'd never do anything like that. So it's hard for me to get into the community, and it's even harder for me being a young kid with different ideas. So I cannot speak to the farming community, but I can definitely speak to the maintenance community, because that's where I have most of my experience. I am a young kid who never went to school for maintenance, who knows a lot more about maintenance than some of these 50, 60, 70-year-olds do. And that threatens them. That concerns them. It took them 40, 50 years to get to the point where they're at with their maintenance careers. And I come in there with a couple years of experience and start figuring stuff out that even supervisors and management couldn't figure out. You know, for example, I had a machine that was not running correctly. Well, it had a slide shaft in seals, and it was lubricated. Well, one of the seals went bad, it lost all of its oil, and no one could figure it out. I just went up there, touched the shaft, said it was hot as heck, and that was their problem, and everyone stared at me because they had spent hours trying to diagnose it, and I touched one part and figured it out. I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I sure seem to be able to diagnose mechanical issues with in regards to industrial maintenance. Then you get to the topic of, well, how do you combine those abilities with building community? Well, it's really hard. So if you just walk up there and a machine's broken and say, this is what's wrong, fix it, and it's right, you know, you were correct in what was wrong, that could offend people. Now, a lot of you folk might say, oh, don't worry about offending people. Don't worry about offending people. Well, you would worry about it if it was your neighbor you were offending. You would worry about it if it was a coworker. You would worry about it if it was somebody in your farm conglomeration, your co-op, that was causing these issues. But again, is it issues or is it just contrarian thinking? You know, I listen to a lot of podcasts that challenge paradigms, you know, because I don't want to do what my grandfather did. I don't want to do what the neighbor's doing. I want to do my own thing, and I want to do it better than what they're doing it, because I'm a Boy Scout. Leave no trace. Leave things better than how you found them. If I were to leave my entire property like this, a lot of you would be screaming at me right now. And I'm sure some of you might be. But this is my sacrifice paddock, so I expect this to be like this. But as you see here, we got good green grass that the cows are not on because I want it to go dormant before we graze it. So it's a challenge for me. Being young, being intelligent, doing things that are different. I want to ask people questions, but the question always comes back to, you know, how are you being perceived? Well, you can change your perception based on your tonalities, based on your word choices. You can change a lot of that stuff. But just take big inflammatory examples. Let's take, you know, Jordan Peterson. He's a real big one. Steven Crowder, he's another real big one. Ben Shapiro. All those guys are very eloquent with their words. They are almost always well-spoken, and they are almost always extremely polite and calm when they talk, yet many people hate them. Is it because of what they're saying, or is it because of how they're saying it? So that's what I mean. It's community is a very interesting, challenging thing, and sometimes you just have to kind of deal with it. And I've said it before, and I absolutely agree with this statement. The more and more I live my life, the more and more I understand this. Sometimes you're just too young, or you're just too old. That's simply all it is. Has nothing to do with your experience, nothing to do with your background, your intelligence, your abilities. It's just how young or old you are. For me, being a young farmer, it's a big challenge, because a lot of folks think that when I say something like, why don't I graze your corn stalks? Oh, this young kid, he's just trying to, whatever. Well, I'm asking these questions to gain knowledge, to see if it's something I even want to do. But again, it's all about perception. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.